Listen to me, this latest chapter of My Hero Academia was absolutely insane. I truly adore information-based chapters, and this one was just made that much sweeter considering the fact that we predicted all of this in what is virtually its entirety with a theory video of ours an entire year ago now. And so with the end of these videos, when I tell you that Plot Armor brings to you some of the best My Hero Academia content on the platform, I am not exaggerating. Time and time again, we have had large-scale predictions of ours be proven true. So please, if you have not already, join the Plot Army and subscribe to the channel. Because beyond just covering the chapters, we make regular My Hero Academia videos that will blow you away. With the previous chapter, we had the conversation between the Todoroki family and the likes of Hawks and Best Jeanist, with their main focus being the defeat of Dabi. Hawks would enlighten Endeavor as to the current events of the situation before questioning what exactly One for All might be. A question now frequently asked by the press and the public, which would serve to shift their shared focus to DEKU, who was currently in a comatose state. All Might, however, was at his bedside, now saying that he can sense the version of himself within the power. That currently, DEKU was in the midst of a conversation with those who held the power before him. With this chapter, we'd come to know that All Might can just barely sense this situation within, as DEKU himself would then possess fleeting thoughts of others questioning their safety, the mark of a truly selfless hero. Someone who, despite his own situation of decimated limbs and seemingly unending sleep, thought of those he'd recently stood alongside and protected. But with this, we'd swiftly find ourselves elsewhere, now surrounded by the many past users of the quirk, as a conversation was to be had indeed. The first user, founder and originator of the quirk, would start by apologizing for the timing of this conversation, as oddly, two of the former users would not be seated and instead would have their backs turned to all this without explanation. Now, these two characters are theorized by many to be people we already know, the likes of Bakugo and Kirishima perhaps. And you know, for the time being, I wouldn't rule it out, but the notion of time travel is pretty insane in of itself, so I can't say I am unfearing of the implications that may have. However, in seeing the sort of gauntlet situation the Bakugo lookalike has going on that may further be seen throughout the chapter, I suppose there is a bit of fuel to that fire, huh? The fourth user would then declare this to be fate, followed by Lariat claiming it to be more of a timing thing in actuality. The fifth user would then confirm that it was Lariat who spoke to DEKU last during his manifestation of Black Whip, referring to him in a particularly familiar capacity, seeing as he had inherited the power from him during his lifetime. Shimura Nana remained particularly quiet, as the vestige of All Might was wordless and only partially formed. DEKU then looked back at them all, somewhat amazed, as the first user would again speak, this time in reference to their time together, saying that previously they were only able to interact with him when he was particularly shaken mentally. Now, the reason the word interact is used here in place of communication or the like is that in the sense of his fight against Shinso during the UA Sports Festival, they didn't speak, but they certainly assisted him when his mind was compromised and he sought to resist. But be this as it may, I would therefore have to question the causation for their visitation just before the Class 1A vs 1B exhibition matches. Content that is soon to be adapted by the anime later this month that we will of course be covering as well. In this instance, DEKU did a bit of simple stamina training followed by a bit of One for All practice. At the time, he was so tired in fact that he fell asleep before taking a shower, but it's not as if he was mentally exhausted, but rather physically so. This instance too was also particularly elongated with an almost complete retelling of the past, one that was followed by a bit of inadvertent destruction to DEKU's surroundings, and so I wonder how this moment factors into this overall equation. But perhaps this could simply be attributed to the growth of the quirk, as the first user does specify that within the last 4 months, the power has been growing exponentially. And with this being the case, with this stockpiling of power, so too would the spirits of these past users be collected to the point of a sort of communicable collective consciousness, which is ridiculously cool and further serves to explain All Might's oversight when it came to the notion of Deku being unable to interact with the past users. But yeah, following the invasion of All For One within the domain, they may now appear before Deku with greater ease. But just then, Lariat would make it clear that Deku will still have privacy, so no worries in that regard. They won't exactly be attentive when he's using the bathroom or anything. A clarification that is humorous, but actually appreciated because we know that's where the minds of some fans can go at times. However, again, Deku has yet to fully form a mouth, what was previously a plot device to limit direct questions and emphasize the mystery of the whole thing, a rather clever approach. However, in recounting his interaction with Shigaraki and All For One in this space, Deku would focus his efforts and recognize the gradual manifestation of his words. He would then speak in a muffled manner, asking them all what they meant about having to talk, much to the delight of Lariat, who's very much proving himself to be the comic relief of this collective. And with this, the fourth user would then arise to speak. He would introduce himself properly to be Shinomori Hagake, saying that in Deku's latest fight, it was his power that was brought forth by Deku's will. And in turn, Deku then remembered the sensation of danger sense as Shinomori made it clear how scary the situation was for him, as he was alerted to be alert of Deku's alertness manifesting. This communication, albeit rather convoluted, definitely served to quickly illustrate the sort of person this man happened to be. Now remember, this is the past user with the dodgy history All Might sought to avoid. Lariat, being the one to inherit the power from Shinomori, would then elaborate by saying that Shinomori was a hermit who lived in the woods alone because society was a bit too much for him. Shinomori then conveying that times were difficult during his lifetime, that he wasn't the strange one, that it was everyone else. And as Lariat said this, he tried to wrap his arm around his late master, but was entirely evaded. This would continue even as Lariat began to incorporate his quirk into these pursuits, but effortlessly, Shinomori was able to continuously dodge out of the way. And I absolutely love Danger Sense, which was another thing we predicted in its entirety, by the way. However, Shinomori would question if Deku was aware of his age and cause of death. Deku would then confirm that he was 40 at the time. However, his cause of death appeared to be crossed out in All Might's notes. Shinomori then became a bit more serious as he'd express that it was surprisingly due to old age. Deku was of course confused by this, and it was something that perplexed Shinomori too post-mortem, and so he discussed it with his successor. But it wasn't until All Might's findings that they were able to truly understand. One for All may no longer be possessed by a normal person. With the exception of All Might, Shinomori possessed the power for the longest span of time. You see, for 18 long years, he was able to avoid All For One, all while training the power. During his possession, he aptly recognized that he'd be severely out of his depth against All For One, and so he sought to cultivate the power during his time with it to better prepare those to come. However, in his final year, the quirk broke him. Initially believing it to perhaps be a case of poor constitution on his part or chronic disease during his lifetime, only having his suspicions corrected by All Might's very existence. His death meant that One For All will gradually consume the life force of its possessor. Deku was baffled by these findings and would in turn turn to the case of All Might once more, as he had possessed the power for more than double the time. The founder would then respond. All Might was fearful of his findings because he deduced that the inconsistency amongst life expectancies may be an inherent limitation that candidates may unknowingly possess. The first user didn't have the power for very long and died in battle, as many others did, so there wasn't much of a sample size for any proper conclusions. A sentiment that certainly corroborates All Might's reluctance to divulge that which he was unsure of entirely. However, in All Might's research, Shinomori's questions would again be answered. That what All Might possesses that he didn't was a lack of possession itself, as All Might was born quirkless. It was all thanks to the model of his subconscious relaying his findings that they were able to deduce as such. The conventions of All For One only serving to further this sentiment. All For One spoke of consciousness being tied to one's quirk, but seeing as All Might was quirkless, it makes the case of his vestige rather peculiar. All Might alone was able to call them forth without being aware of it himself. For 40 long years, All Might had this power. Metaphorically speaking, those with quirks already have full cups inherently, and so to add the power of One for All to an already full cup would of course lead to a sort of dangerous overflow. And especially considering the fact that the quirk only becomes more and more powerful as time goes on, that becomes more and more power that cannot be handled. However, All Might's metaphorical cup was empty to begin with, and so it's likely that the quirk conformed to him, in a sense, becoming his true quirk. And as the first truly quirkless user of the power, this would explain why he was so damn powerful during his time with it. And in that sense, having come to fit All Might so perfectly, it's understandable that the quirk needed a bit of time to allocate itself to Deku's being. And this is me speaking to the questions that yet remain to them in regard to this quirk's adaptation. But ultimately, the conclusion being that those with the least to offer, those born without quirks, have the greatest potential when it comes to inheriting the power. And as such, the risk of providing the inherently blessed with the quirk is too great. As time has progressed, the percentile of people without quirks has diminished more and more, making the list of potential applicants far shorter. As such, Deku's holding of the quirk is quite frankly a miracle, seeing as nobody could have foreseen such a case. Or at least nobody outside of plot armor. But as such, they would regret having been unable to communicate with successors until now. That perhaps many unfortunate circumstances could have been avoided as a shot of Sir Night Eye is provided. Lariat then goes on to clarify and confirm our theory from oh so long ago, that Deku may very well be the last user of One for All, a sentiment that was clearly a lot for Deku to bear. However, that was just a bit of insightful conversation, as it was now time for the true topic at hand, as Shimura Nana, who'd remained entirely silent up until this point, would speak up, now asking if Deku will be able to kill her grandson, Shigaraki Tomura, for her, and that was the chapter. Wow, this is intense and I am all in. From Shoto's story to that of One for All, many fans have at times noticed similarities between this series and that of Avatar: The Last Airbender, a series that I have personally covered at length on our cartoon channel. And with this sentiment, Shimura Nana reminds me of Avatar Kyoshu's bluntness at the end of the series, or perhaps the later guidance of Avatar Roku in regards to the handling of his great-grandson, Fire Lord Zuko, for those of you familiar with the comic series. I adore this and I cannot wait for Deku's response. The fact of the matter being that with the revelation of Shigaraki being her grandson conveyed through All Might's vestige during his fight against All For One, this is something Shimura Nana has known for some time. And even so, her outlook doesn't seem to be hopeful or wishful at all, but rather a bit cold, and understandably so. However, it is fascinating that she conveys this as a far more personal matter, speaking of it as a favor to her rather than the collective or the defeat of All For One. Now hopefully with Deku being able to speak, he'll additionally question the state of the second and third wielders, but we'll just have to wait and see. And if you'd like to see more incredible content you won't find anywhere else, then again, be sure to subscribe to Plot Armor with notifications on. We have additionally gone to great lengths to have our Instagram and Twitter pages provide you all with the latest news and announcements related to all your favorite anime and manga series, including My Hero Academia. On the channel, we cover the absolute biggest news for sure, but for all that and everything in between as swiftly as possible, I can't suggest that follow enough. And to all the Plot Army soldiers out there, our Patreon page is as always down in the description below and the card above, because when it comes to bringing you some of the best My Hero Academia content on the platform, Plot Armor has you covered. As always, I'm Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.